Hey, welcome back. I'm Adam. Really glad you're here today.
And I'm Maya. Today's topic is something big, something that affects every single person alive, but a lot of people find hard to talk about.
Human rights. We're going to explore what they are, why they matter, and how ordinary life connects to them. Just the two of us, talking it through together.
So get comfortable. Let's go.
Okay, Maya, what are human rights? Like, really simply.
Really simply, they're the basic rights and freedoms every person has, just because they're human, not because of where they were born, or what they look like, or what religion they follow, just because they exist.
So it's not something a government gives you.
No, that's the key thing. They're not a gift from a government. They belong to you already. The question is whether they're protected or not.
And where did this idea officially come from?
The modern version really took shape after World War II. After millions of people were killed and whole communities were destroyed, the world came together and said, we need to agree on some rules, things that should never happen to any human being anywhere.
And so the United Nations wrote the Universal Declaration of Human Rights in 1948.
30 rights, things like the right to life, the right to education, the right to be free, the right not to be tortured, the right to be treated equally under the law.
And they apply to everyone. That's what universal means. No exceptions.
Exactly. And that sounds obvious when you say it out loud, but for millions of people right now, those rights are not being protected.
That's what makes this conversation so important. These are not just nice ideas on paper. They're things real people fight for every single day.
I think a lot of people hear human rights and think war zones, prisons, extreme situations, not their daily life.
Right, like it's something that happens far away, not here.
But actually, rights show up in very ordinary moments. Going to school, that's a right, the right to education.
Seeing a doctor when you're sick, that's connected to the right to health.
Being able to say what you think without getting arrested, freedom of expression.
Choosing who you marry, practicing your religion, or choosing not to.
Not being hurt by the police without reason, the right to safety and fair treatment.
When you list them like that, it becomes personal very quickly.
It does. And I think that's the point. Human rights aren't abstract. They're about whether your daily life is free and fair and safe.
Which right feels most important to you personally?
Freedom of expression, I think. The ability to say what you actually think, to question things, to challenge things. When that's taken away, everything else starts to break down.
For me, it's the right to education. I think about how different my life would be if I hadn't had access to good schools and books. It opens doors that would otherwise stay locked forever.
And those doors should be open for everyone, not just people lucky enough to be born in the right place.
Learners, which right feels most important to you? Try to say it in one sentence. For me, the most important right is out loud in English. There's no wrong answer. Let's talk about women's rights, because this is an area where even today, there's still so much work to be done.
So much. And I think it's worth remembering that the rights we consider normal now, women voting, women working, women owning property, those weren't always guaranteed. Women fought for all of them.
The right to vote? In the UK, women got it in 1918. In the US, 1920. In some countries, much later.
And the fight didn't stop there. Equal pay, being paid the same as a man for doing the same job, that's still not fully achieved in most countries.
There's a name for that gap, the gender pay gap. It's the difference between what men and women earn on average.
And it's real. It affects women in almost every industry, every country. Some more than others, but it's everywhere.
What about beyond work?
Safety is huge. The right to live without violence, at home, on the street, in the workplace, and the right to make decisions about your own body and health. That's called bodily autonomy, and it's one of the most debated rights right now.
I think what connects all of these is the idea of equality, not special treatment, Just the same rights, the same opportunities, the same protection under the law.
And the word for believing in that, believing that men and women should have equal rights, is feminism, which is often misunderstood.
A lot of people hear that word and have a strong reaction.
Because it gets tangled up with politics. But at its core, feminism just means equality. That's it. Equal rights for men and women.
Have you personally experienced gender inequality?
Yes, more than once. There was a moment at work where I gave an idea in a meeting and it was ignored. 5 minutes later, a male colleague said essentially the same thing and everyone responded as if it was brilliant.
That's such a specific and painful example, and so common.
Very common. And the frustrating thing is it's subtle. You can't point to one person and say, you discriminated against me. It's a pattern, a feeling, something that builds up over time.
That quiet discrimination, the kind that's hard to name but easy to feel, is one of the hardest forms to address.
Because people can always say, are you sure that's what happened? And you start to doubt yourself.
That internal damage is part of the harm, too.
Let's talk about children's rights, because I think this is an area that touches everyone emotionally. Everyone was a child once.
And there's an international agreement specifically about children's rights, the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child from 1989. Almost every country in the world has agreed to it.
What does it cover?
The basics: the right to life, the right to a name, to a nationality, to a legal identity, the right to education, the right to health, the right to be safe from violence and abuse. But there are some that surprised me when I first read about them.
Like what?
The right to play. It's officially recognized. Children have the right to rest and play and leisure, which sounds obvious, but when you think about how many children around the world don't have that, it matters enormously.
And the right to be heard. Children's opinions should be listened to, especially in decisions that affect their lives.
Which is something adults don't always do well.
We underestimate what children understand. They understand a lot.
What about the bigger violations? Child labor, child marriage.
Child labor is when children, often very young, are forced to work instead of going to school, sometimes in dangerous conditions, often because their families are desperately poor.
And it's hard because you can't just say stop child labor without also addressing the poverty that drives it.
Exactly. It's connected to everything. Poverty, lack of education, lack of government support for struggling families. You can't fix one thread without looking at the whole fabric.
Child marriage is similar. Girls married very young, sometimes at 12 or 13, without any real choice.
It takes away so much at once. Education, health, freedom, childhood itself. And the effects last a lifetime.
Childhood. That phrase really stayed with me when I first heard it. Every child should be allowed to be a child.
Without the weight of adult responsibilities pressed on them too soon.
And education keeps coming up across all of these issues.
Because it's the foundation. When a child, especially a girl, gets a proper education, everything changes. Health outcomes improve, she's more likely to make her own choices, more likely to break cycles of poverty. Education multiplies every other right.
Let's talk about equality and discrimination, because these two things sit at the heart of so many rights conversations.
Equality is what we want. Discrimination is what we're fighting against. And discrimination just means treating someone worse because of who they are.
Because of their skin color, their gender, their age, their religion, their disability, where they're from.
And it can be direct. Someone refusing to hire you because of your skin color. Obvious. Illegal in many countries.
Or it can be indirect, a policy that looks neutral on the surface, but in practice it affects some groups much more than others.
Harder to see, harder to prove, but just as real.
And then there's what's called systemic discrimination, when it's not just one person being unfair, but the whole system producing unequal results.
even if nobody is deliberately trying to discriminate, the structure itself is built in a way that disadvantages certain groups.
That's a hard concept for some people to accept because they think, well, if nobody is trying to be unfair, then it's not discrimination.
But the outcome still harms people. Intent matters morally, but the effect still needs to be addressed.
What are the most important equality issues right now?
Economic inequality is massive. The gap between the richest and the poorest is growing in most countries. And that gap in wealth becomes a gap in everything else: education, health, opportunity, safety.
Racial equality. People of certain backgrounds still face discrimination in hiring, in housing, in the justice system, not everywhere equally, but consistently across many countries.
Gender equality. We talked about that. Disability equality. People with physical or mental disabilities still face enormous barriers to education, to work, to just moving around in a city.
And all of these are connected. They're not separate issues. They all come back to the same idea. Every person deserves dignity, and equal opportunity.
I want to ask you something. Do you think equality is actually possible? Like, truly?
I think full equality of outcome might not be possible. People are different, life is unpredictable, but equality of opportunity, genuine, real opportunity for every person, that I believe we can work toward.
There's an important distinction there. Equality versus equity. Giving everyone the same thing versus giving each person what they specifically need to have a fair chance.
The famous example, 3 people of different heights trying to see over a fence. If you give them all the same box, the shortest person still can't see. You need to give bigger support to those who need it more.
That's equity, and equity is what actually produces fairness.
Not identical treatment, fair outcomes.
Can we talk about something practical? Because discrimination is a topic where conversations can go wrong very fast.
It gets heated. People get defensive or they shut down before anything useful is said.
So the language you use really matters. There's a way to talk about these things that keeps the conversation open and a way that closes it immediately.
What's your first tip?
I would say use I instead of you. I feel this is unfair instead of you are discriminating. One invites conversation, the other puts someone on trial.
I need to understand better. In my experience, that's a great opener too. It frames what you're saying as personal, not an accusation.
From what I've read and learned, that shows you've thought about it, done some research, not just reacting.
I think we need to consider. That one invites the other person to think alongside you rather than demanding they agree.
And sometimes it's okay to say, I'm still learning about this, but I believe, because none of us has all the answers. Showing that humility actually makes people more willing to listen.
Have you ever had a conversation about discrimination that really went well?
Yes, once with a colleague who had very different views. And what made it work was that neither of us was trying to win. We were genuinely curious about each other's perspective.
That's rare.
It is, but it's possible. And the language helps a lot. I understand your point of view, but I see it differently. That one sentence keeps the door open.
This is complicated, and that's exactly why we need to keep talking about it. I love that one.
Because complexity is not a reason to stop talking. It's a reason to keep going.
Freedom of speech and expression. This might be the most debated right in the world right now.
Especially online. The conversation about what people should and shouldn't be allowed to say has never been louder.
So, what is it exactly?
At its core, it's the right to say what you think without the government punishing you for it, to share your opinions, challenge authority, make art that makes people uncomfortable.
In some countries, that right is very strong. In others, journalists go to prison for criticizing the government, artists are silenced, protesters are arrested.
And when that happens, everything suffers, because free expression is how problems get exposed, how corruption gets challenged, how change happens.
Like a torch in a dark room. When people can speak, they shine light on what's wrong.
I love that image. But there are limits, right? Freedom of speech isn't absolute.
No, most societies agree that you can't use freedom of speech to incite violence, to spread dangerous lies that hurt people, to threaten or harass individuals.
So it's a right, but with responsibility attached.
The balance between those two things, freedom and responsibility, is something every society is always negotiating.
And it changes. What's acceptable in one era or one culture isn't necessarily acceptable in another.
Have you ever felt like you couldn't speak freely?
Yes, not because of a law, but because of the consequences. Professional ones, social ones. There were things I believed but didn't say because I knew it would cost me something.
That's called self-censorship, and it's probably more common than legal censorship in most free countries.
You silence yourself, not because someone forced you, but because you're afraid of the reaction.
And there's a difference between that and just tact. Choosing the right moment, not saying everything you think all the time.
Right. Not every thought needs to be spoken, but holding back because of fear, that's worth examining. That's a sign that something isn't quite free.
Freedom of expression shows up in very ordinary ways too. Being able to wear what expresses who you are, disagreeing with your boss, posting your opinion online, practicing your religion or choosing not to.
All forms of expression, all things that can be restricted.
And all worth protecting. Let's talk about some of the people who have shaped the human rights story. People who saw injustice and decided to do something about it.
Malala Yousafzai, a young woman from Pakistan who spoke out for girls' right to education. She was shot for it. She survived, and she kept speaking.
She won the Nobel Peace Prize, and her message was so simple. One child, one teacher, one book, one pen can change the world.
Nelson Mandela, imprisoned for 27 years in South Africa for fighting against apartheid, a system of racial separation and oppression. And when he finally came out, he chose reconciliation, not revenge.
That is extraordinary. After 27 years.
He said something like, "It always seems impossible until it's done," which applies to so much more than just his story.
Rosa Parks, 1955. She refused to give up her seat on a bus to a white man, as the law at the time required black people to do. And her quiet act of refusal sparked a movement.
She said, "I had decided that I would not be moved." Such calm, such certainty.
And thousands of less famous people in every country, every generation, who made smaller but equally brave choices.
A teacher who spoke out, a journalist who published a dangerous story, a parent who fought for their child's right to education.
All part of the same larger story.
What can we take from them?
That one person's voice matters. That courage doesn't always look dramatic. Sometimes it looks like refusing to move. Sometimes it looks like a young girl going to school when people say she shouldn't.
And that change is slow, frustratingly slow. But it happens. It is happening. And every conversation, including this one, is part of it.
Let's end the main conversation with something practical. What can ordinary people actually do when it comes to human rights?
Because it can feel overwhelming. Like, what difference can I make? I'm just one person.
But one person times many is a movement.
The first thing? Learn. The more you understand, the better you can talk about it, advocate for it, recognize when it's being violated.
Speak up. When you witness something unfair, say something. It doesn't have to be a speech. Sometimes a quiet, "That's not okay," is enough to make someone feel seen.
Support organizations doing the work. Locally or globally, there are people dedicating their lives to protecting rights. Even small support matters.
And honestly, vote. In countries where you have that right, use it. Democracy is a human rights tool.
Listen to people whose experiences are different from yours, especially people who face discrimination you don't. Their knowledge is real and valuable.
And just be kind. It sounds small, but dignity starts with how we treat the person directly in front of us.
Every interaction where you recognize the full humanity of another person, that's human rights in practice, not just in law, in life.
Learners, your challenge this week: have one honest conversation about something from today with a friend, a family member, yourself. Use the language you've learned. Be curious, be honest, be kind.
You don't need all the answers. Curiosity is enough to start.
We've covered a lot today: women's rights, children's rights, equality, discrimination, freedom of expression.
And the thread through all of it is simple. Every person has worth. Every person deserves dignity. Every person's rights matter.
The more people who can talk about this, in English and in every language, the closer we get to a world that actually lives up to that idea.
Your challenge this week: have one honest conversation about human rights, in English, about something from today.
And now, let's close with something we always love doing: the vocabulary summary. Every important word from today, explained simply.
Let's go through the key words from today. Short and simple, just the word, what it means, and one example.
Human rights, the basic rights and freedoms every person has just for being human. Every person has human rights. They don't stop at borders.
Universal, applying to everyone, everywhere, without exception. Human rights are universal. They belong to all people.
Declaration, an official public statement. The Universal Declaration of Human Rights was signed in 1948.
Dignity, the quality of being worthy of respect, being treated as a full human being. Every person deserves to be treated with dignity.
Equality, when everyone is treated with the same respect and given the same opportunities. She fought her whole life for equality in the workplace.
Equity, giving people what they specifically need to have a fair chance, not just the same thing. Equity means the shorter person gets a bigger box so they can see over the fence too.
Discrimination, treating someone worse because of who they are, their race, gender, age, religion, or disability. Discrimination in hiring is illegal in many countries.
Systemic, built into the structures and systems of society, not just individual behavior. Systemic discrimination is harder to see, but just as damaging.
Prejudice, a negative opinion about a group formed without real knowledge based on stereotypes. Prejudice is often the root from which discrimination grows.
Stereotype, a fixed, oversimplified idea about a group of people. Stereotypes reduce complex people to simple, often false labels.
Feminism, the belief that women and men should have equal rights and opportunities. Feminism is simply about equality, nothing more, nothing less.
Gender pay gap, the difference in average earnings between men and women. The gender pay gap affects women in almost every industry.
Bodily autonomy, the right of a person to make decisions about their own body. Bodily autonomy is a fundamental right.
Empowerment, giving someone the confidence and tools to control their own life. Education is one of the most powerful tools for the empowerment of girls.
Exploitation, using someone vulnerable for your own benefit in a way that harms them. Child labor is a form of exploitation.
Vulnerable, in a position where you are more likely to be hurt or taken advantage of. Children are a vulnerable group who needs special protection.
Censorship, when authority controls what people can say, write, or show. Censorship prevents people from knowing the truth.
Self-censorship, when you silence yourself because you're afraid of the consequences. She practiced self-censorship at work, afraid of what her boss might think.
Dissent, disagreement with the official or dominant view. Political dissent is a healthy sign in any democracy.
Accountability, when people in power must answer for their actions. Without accountability, power becomes corruption.
Structural change, changing the systems and institutions of society, not just individual attitudes. Real equality requires structural change, not just good intentions.
Privilege. Advantages some people have, often without realizing it, because of who they are. Recognizing your privilege means understanding that others face barriers you don't.
Marginalized, pushed to the edges of society, with less power and fewer opportunities. Marginalized communities deserve genuine inclusion, not just tolerance.
Inclusion. Making sure everyone is genuinely welcomed and able to participate. Diversity without inclusion is just numbers.
Representation, when different groups of people are visible in positions of power and leadership. Representation matters. You can't be what you can't see.
Activism. Taking action to create social or political change. She uses her platform for environmental activism.
And finally, reconciliation, the process of restoring friendly relations after conflict or harm. After years of division, the country chose reconciliation over revenge.
Before we go, if today's conversation stirred something in you, that's a good thing. It means you're paying attention to the world around you.
And that matters more than you know.
Take care of your heart.
You're doing better than you think.
See you next time.
See you soon. Take good care of yourselves and of each other.